Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to go. So, big welcome to episode 2 of our Malt Travail podcast. We kicked off last week, just some general thoughts about planning the perfect beer trip when we come out of lockdown. News today probably isn't that great. Prime Minister yesterday was talking about possibly May before pubs may reopen, which seems a hell of a long way. We're just about to go into February now. So this week, we are going to talk a little bit more about what makes the perfect pub. So we talked last week about George Orwell, who came up with his moon under the water concept of the perfect pub. So we're going to use some of those characteristics and have a chat about those as well. So we'll just do a little bit of kind of parish notices to kick off before we kind of get into discussion. A couple of things to pick up from last week, and obviously check in with Nick and Bruce and see how they both are. So in terms of what we're drinking tonight, I know Bruce is still on the soft drink. He's still
sadly
post-COVID, so we'll ignore Bruce. I've had a couple of nice boxes this week and a lovely box from Beartown Brewery, and I've got a tasting tomorrow night, which I'm looking forward to. Got a box from Honest Brew this week, and last week I had a box from Flavoury. So a bit of a combination. I've started on the more Bristol Brewery. I quite like this. It's a pale bitter, 3.8%. It is quite nice actually, and that comes from the Flavoury kind of boxes that I know I've got Bruce and Nick one of those before. And then I've moved on now to this one, Tramlines of the Park, which is a Sheffield Sheffield themed beer. It's a collab between Thornbridge Brewery, obviously down there in Bakewell, and Tramlines Festival in Hillsborough. So it's quite a nice session IPA. And I'm going to finish up with, again, a brewery I've never come across before, 6 Degrees North, which are up in Aberdeen. And this is a guy was inspired by Belgian brewery. So, and apparently Aberdeen is 6 degrees north of Belgium. So that's why they call the brewery. And that's a pale ale. Nick, what are you on tonight?
Keeping it Yorkshire again. Give you a clue.
Oh, a bit of Nick Hambleton Ale, is it?
Yeah. Hambleton Nightmare. It's a pretty crappy evening up here in Malton again, rainy and cold. So it is a Thursday night, so I didn't want too much. So it's a nice 5% porter. It's everything you look for in a porter. It's warming, it's slightly sweet, it's slightly toasted. Yeah, spot on.
So, Bruce, if you were drinking tonight, what would your be kind of end of January brew? I mean, do you do dry January? Is that something you've never? I thought about it, but I wasn't going to do it.
No, absolutely not. I'm definitely not vegan. You were right. If I were drinking tonight, I would probably. We found some wonderful porters in an independent beer shop that closed down last year. So we sprung it on me. I have to find a bottle in the shed.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, I'll find the name. So.
I think you're right. I think it is that port kind of weather, isn't it, at the moment? So I just thought again, maybe stuff. I've actually been doing a bit of reading about whiskey this week, and I put a couple of podcasts, and I quite like my whiskey as well. And I've been learning about the malt riots this week, which happened in 1700 something, which led to whiskey really becoming a massive thing. And then another podcast was about Johnny Walker, which is actually was quite interesting. Actually, I didn't know all the different labels, and apparently he was a grocer out on the west coast of Scotland, and then got into whiskey blending. So we may come back to the whiskey at some point.
That'd be great.
Yeah, a bit of news there. Just again, and this is mainly from that on my camera. Papers and magazine this week. Timothy Taylor's apparently are ceasing cask beer production at the moment, because obviously the way they are in the pandemic, which sounds a little bit of a shame, and maybe a while before they kick up again, they're going to carry on obviously bottling and canning. And then again, not surprisingly, really, a couple of breweries, Molson Coors, are closing up the Burtonwood Brewery in Warrington, which I think it's been there for quite a while. But I think Green or Whitby people may have been there. But apparently Thomas Hardy share that site. Apparently they're going to stay on because there's a bottling plant there as well. And then just been looking at the Camera. I wasn't aware actually Camera have a public transport support group as well, and actually they're offering 20% discount on National Express. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about planning next week. So I'd come across that. So that's something that's quite useful, really, that I learned this week. And we've just been talking now. Aldi are in the press today. I think it's a very good bit of advertising really for Aldi. Aldi's the claim in the press is, I'm looking at the Manchester Echo here. Manchester Evening News is Aldi's selling beer at 99p that should have gone to the pubs. But there's quite a broad range actually of Spitfire, Hold Hooky, Shelby from Thornbridge, Snake Oil from West Berkshire. So again, perhaps if you're heading towards Aldi, maybe have a look at that as well. Anything you guys have learned this week?
Not allowed to. No Aldi in Malton.
No Aldi in
We've only
Malton.
got a little.
Oh, there's plenty in York, plenty in Stoke. Anything you guys have picked up this week? Any news or think something you've learnt?
I noticed that Tim Martin had cashed in all his Wetherspoon shares and collected a small fortune, hasn't he? That was a bit ominous, I thought, really. Why is he doing that?
Well, I guess, you know, they're a big company, but I guess they have to really, their business model is buy cheap, sell cheap, and sell lots of it. And I guess they are really stuffed, aren't they, in terms of kind of where they are? I mean, I'm not aware of them doing anything like takeaways or food takeaways. I think they've pretty much closed. I think the ones around us have completely closed down. So you do think about, you know, okay, staff may be furloughed, but the ongoing costs. I mean, you think about a lot of those pubs are in fairly prime locations, aren't they? Will have high rents and things.
He sold 4.3 million ordinary shares at a price of £11.50, netting him £50 million and reducing his company stake to 21.88%. So I suppose his influence is going to decline a bit now, isn't it, really? I wonder if it'll make any difference in, bearing in mind there'll be social distancing and the sort of volume, the margins, might be a huge change in the way that company operates, mightn't there?
He may well be setting up a whole chain of pubs in France, French and Belgium, one like quite a few of the other Brexit shouters who all seem to be setting up business now in Europe. So watch your space, maybe. Nick, anything from yourself? Anything you've picked up? Any news?
Not really very news. No, you mentioned Camera. This month's magazine's a good read again. It's I think if anybody is thinking about becoming a member of Camera, I'd certainly promote it. You get some interesting reading. You know, they do a lot of campaigning. Certainly, we're going to be talking about Victorian pubs, interiors and things like that a little bit later on this evening. And, certainly they've got a professional group together now that can really lobby and make sure that these unscrupulous property developers who go in and knock pubs down overnight. In fact, I think there's a case in London where they're actually making the property developer rebuild the pub brick by brick.
That's
because
right,
they clamped straight down on it and got the agreement of the courts. And as I say, the literature, the beer magazine, never found much in the What's Brewing newspaper, but I said the beer mag is good. And then obviously, just been talking about Tim Martin, you know, you get the price of your membership back in vouchers, and they've extended the voucher scheme now, so it's not just Wetherspoons. There's 3 or 4 other pub companies there that will accept the 50p off vouchers. Once again, unfortunately, not many of those pub groups are operating in Yorkshire or North Yorkshire, but I've managed to spend most of mine during the course of the year when I drop into Wetherspoons. They're everywhere. There's
been quite a bit of debate about that. Again, just going on about Camera, their podcast, actually, Pubs Pint People, is a really great, if you've listened to there's quite a few episodes, series now, they're really good. And I think last time I listened to them, there's been a bit of debate about the Wetherspoons vouchers and whether Camera, whether that relationship, partnership may be changing and whether Camera should be promoting Tim Martin. I mean, you do get a good range of real ale in Tim Martin's pubs, but again, I'm not quite sure that I think he maybe set out with that in mind. I think now it's a very commercial model. I think it'd be interesting just what you thought, what you mentioned there, whether there'll be quite a lot of community groups, maybe looking at putting on those orders on pubs that, again, maybe now under threat with being closed, especially a lot of those wet pubs that, just haven't been able to do anything pretty much all this year. Some of those ones we'll talk about, some of those old little traditional quiet boozers. You do wonder whether, locals will be trying to get those orders out so that they can't be turned into flats and retail units.
We might get a few more community room pubs, like we've got the here in York quite successfully. They say for these wet pubs now, it's hard to see a way back. I mean, the debts are accruing, must be getting colossal, but it might be rather see them close. There will be more red pubs.
So actually, Golden Balls just reminded me, Bruce, we've got a couple of just things catch up last week. We all had a bit of a kind of brain freeze last week, and we kept talking about a pub that we frequent in Malton called the Blue Ball. So again, those of you on the YouTube thing, I've just put a few pictures up here of the Blue Ball, which is a cracking little pub in Malton, quite an old pub, and a fantastic interior. The Fitzwilliam room, which is on the right, if you can see the screen, a really nice little snug room, and the bar is minute. So. And apparently it's still knocking on, it's still doing really well, and hopefully we'll be reopened again. So again, we just to confirm, that's the Blue Ball in Malton. And then the other one we kind of got the name kind of right was the Garden Gate, which is in Hunslet in Leeds, which we mentioned last week. It's one of those preservation heritage pubs. Again, if you can see the screen, there's the right hand side there. So just mention that we are now putting this podcast out onto YouTube as well. So we are going to do kind of a visual version. Obviously, the talk will be the same. So again, perhaps either if you're listening to podcasts, perhaps at some point, if you want to have a quick look at YouTube, you'll see some of the pictures we're talking about. I'm hoping to kind of remind us what we should be talking about, and obviously you'll see our lovely faces as well. So I think without further ado, oh no, Nick, you kind of just raised a thing we didn't talk about last week, wasn't it? Was something about what's the perfect number? What's in terms of colleagues on beer trips? Do you want to just chip in with that?
Yeah, that's right. It's number. I mean, we call it a beer trip, not a pub crawl. Obviously, the title pub crawl has got negative tones to it. So, just ideal numbers, really. I mean, I would proffer anywhere sort of between maximum of 4 to 5. Less than 3, you need to know the other person pretty well, to be honest with you. But there's a number of practicalities as well involved. I mean, we tend to run with a kitty. Now, you two guys had decided last week that 8 pints is about normal for a beer trip. So, if there's 2 or 3 of you, then you pretty much share the day out equally. If there's 4 or 5, then whoever's putting the kitty last probably only buys 1 round. So there's kitty to consider, even practical things like seating. I mean, once again, we're going to be talking about Victorian interiors. One classic Victorian interior is the small rooms. It's the screens, it's areas where you can only maybe squeeze 3 or 4 people in comfortably. So if you've got more than 4 or 5 of you, then you start to get a bit more spread out. And also, I think when you're going to places, real ale pubs and that, you don't want to appear to be too intimidating. If a great gang of 6, 7, 8 of you rock up, then, even though, you can be the mildest man, and, best people in the world, it can be a bit intimidating for the locals and for the bar staff, thinking, oh God, we've got a group of blokes here, and especially when we've had a few, we're in good spirits, So I would proffer maximum of 5, sort of 3 or 4 is more the ideal number. I don't know about you two.
Yeah, you're right. Unfortunately, such is the way people behave, especially on a weekend now. And we talked about the Staley Bridge trip last week, didn't we? Where we were doing that years ago, and now it's just turned into a sort of a day-long drunk, excuse for people to go on like a mad drunken orgy. And I'm also that little train line, a place people avoid now, isn't it? Which is terrible, really. Yeah, so sadly, it's sanitary.
Yeah, and I guess I've linked
the numbers bring suspicion, don't they?
Yeah, and I think certainly in places like York and Liverpool on a Saturday afternoon, quite a lot of certainly those in the main drag have got security bounced on the doors, and they probably wouldn't let you in more than groups 3 and 4, would they? So you got to play. I think we also said last week one of the beauties of doing this is you go into a little pub and you get a chatting to the kind of the old geezers who are in there, they've been there forever. And again, I think Nick's right. I think when you're in a bigger group, you tend to kind of almost be a bit more cliquey that you talk. You keep it group. I think when there's 2 or 3 of you, it seems to be easier then to have conversations with people at the next table or when you're at the bar. So I think that's. But perhaps we might revisit that next week when we talk about our planning and the kind of how you kind of get everything kind of in your head about what you're going to do. So let's crack on with tonight's theory. So I've just put a little picture of the Bolt Makers up there. We mentioned that last week in Keighley, which is certainly one of the pubs that certainly me, Bruce, and Nick used to go to frequently whenever we went out that way. It's really handy, actually. It's very close to the station, isn't it? Because I was actually looking on their TripAdvisor page, and a lot of people were saying they weren't planning to go there, but they came out the station. It was a typical horrible wet Keighley day, and the first pub they saw was the Bolt Makers. They were waiting for the train to go to Haworth, which again a lot of people do, don't they? Or they're waiting for the steam train, because that's the other thing there. So steam train, and they got in there and had a great little time. And certainly I can't remember we've been there when it's been a bad experience. So we might end up going back to the Bolt Makers after we've done our 10. So we mentioned that obviously George Orwell, I don't know, sometime in the 1920s or 30s, I think, wrote, it wasn't actually in the book, it was a kind of a pamphlet or an essay that he wrote about this kind of mythical moon underwater. This is the one that's in London, which is where it's actually been in here. I think again, it's not far from Holborn, I remember rightly. It's I think it's near the, is it the City York or the Samsmith on the same road? Almost.
No, that's not the moon of the water.
Oh, the Cheshire Cheese is down. No, I'm saying across the other side of the road, I think this is. I remember walking down there. Right. So Weatherspoons pubs are Moon Under the Water. Is that one in Manchester? Is that a Weatherspoons as well? That's Moon Under the Water there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So anyway,
Moon Under the Water at the top of Whitehall's closed down, hasn't it?
Has it? I know quite a few.
And that was the most Weatherspoons pub, I think.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but that was quite nice.
Really sad that's gone,
actually, they did a good breakfast in there as well. There was a little beer garden at the back, wasn't there? That's right, on the right hand side as you walk.
It was a limited menu, but they also had a vast choice of beers on. Really well. And I say, did it feel like a Weatherspoons? Really sad that's gone, yeah.
Yeah. So this is again on the screen. I'll perhaps read them out for those that listen to the podcast. Orwell stipulated 10 key points that his perfect pub should have. I think we mentioned last week that this actually was a town pub. And again, I think he focused on London. Apparently somewhere there is again, I don't think it's been published, but he also did a similar thing for a country pub, which again would be great perhaps to pick that up. So I've never come across that. So he talks about architecture, he talks about games, he talks about the pub environment, he talks about the barmaid, he talks about what the pub sells apart from beer and spirits, he talks about food, he talks about the glassware, the bottles and the cans and things that you took. Sorry, that's wrong, isn't it? The drinking vessels, he calls them. And then at the end, he just talks a little bit about he thinks the perfect pub has got narrow passages and a beer garden. So we covered a little bit of that last week in our kind of general philosophy about what we like, what we enjoy about pubs and beer and culture. So we thought we'd just go through each of these and maybe think about places that we visited. And I said the kind of grand scheme is to kind of how we might use these to plan that perfect trip once we're all allowed out again. So we're going to go through them bit by bit. If I read them out and then you can all hear them and then Bruce and Nick will chip in, we kind of where we are. So Orwell, first point, said the architecture and fittings must be uncompromisingly Victorian. So again, for those that can see the screen, we've just got a picture of the Princess Louise in Holborn in London, which is a Sam Smith's pub. I think we mentioned that last week, actually, with a fantastic interior. I think, actually, a lot of it has been remodelled. I don't think a lot of it's original, from what I read.
No, it has a Princess Louise. It is. It's all what I called pseudo last week, but it's decently done pseudo.
But if you've ever been in there, it's got these booths, hasn't it, all the way kind of down the bar, kind of glass screen, so you kind of...
Yeah, that's your typical... I mean, to be honest with you, the vast majority of Victorian pubs that were created in the Victorian times have all been remodelled.
Yeah.
Even though the Edwardian period was only 10 years, there was a hell of a lot of refurbishing and rebuilding going on in that period. Now, some were still modelled on Victorian-style pubs. But obviously, the original Victorian pub really came out of the gym palaces.
Yeah.
And in the big cities and the big towns, it was the landlord trying to show his good taste and his affluency. And that's why from gin palace, you then became palaces for beer. So your typical style, if you walk into a pub, if you see lots of mahogany, lots of etched glass, lots of brass, textured ceilings, textured wallpaper, it's Victorian. But whether it's real Victorian, as in going back to 1850s to 1900s, or whether it's Victorian pseudo that's been put in any time from sort of 1920 onwards, it's difficult to tell sometimes.
Because the Victorian Durham is preserved, isn't it? It's not
absolutely, and that's the other end, Bruce. Yeah, that's very much utility. It's not velour on leather. It's the small rooms, which is the other thing that Victorians liked. Within a pub, they still like to have a hierarchy, and they still like to have social classes. So your tap rooms, your smoke rooms, your parlours. That's something the Victorians were still keen to do. So. Once again, that's a good indication. If you go into what feels to be an old traditional pub and it's got lots of different rooms, then it's a good chance it was originally built Victorian times, really.
Yeah. And then the other image we've got there is the Philharmonic in Liverpool, which I think is probably does retain quite a lot of its original characteristics. Built in the, I think, about 1890s, late 1890s. I think it was a Keynes pub initially. And obviously it's got lots of infamous because Paul McCartney and John Lennon drank there. And I think recently, Paul McCartney did an impromptu concert, didn't he, and things as well. It's a great place. It's in between the two cathedrals. It's right across from the Philharmonic Hall. So a great little pub there. And last week, they're perhaps a little bit demised now.
It has done well to survive, to be honest with you, because obviously it's not really on a trail or on a crawl, is it?
Mm.
It is sort of out on a limb, unless you're going to the cathedrals, or unless you're going to the.
Although all the buzzes, all those open top buzzes, stop right outside the door. That's certainly the last time I've been. I jumped on a buzz and went that way. And of course, I've got a picture there of the very famous gents' toilets, which have very ornate tiling in them as well. So well worth a visit. So we mentioned last week that the beer may be not quite as good as it used to be, and it's a Nicholson's house. So there's always a good variety, though. And again, if you do get that Nicholson's app, you can normally end up having a couple of free pints or a free bowl of chips, something which is quite good as well. Any other thoughts about? I think obviously we've been blessed because certainly the places where we often went, places like Leeds and York have got many kind of Manchester, many Victorian style pubs, haven't they? And obviously industrial, giants in that Victorian period.
Shall I run through a few of the ones that I remember?
Yeah.
Right, so let's start close to home. Let's start in Malton. We mentioned Blue Ball, should I say. I mean, Blue Ball actually goes back before Victorian times, but I think the best example still in town, certain rooms, is the Spotted Cow. I mean, once again, because we've always had Tetleys in Yorkshire, Tetleys made the job a little bit easy because they went around in the late 1980s, early 1990s, identifying their Tetleys heritage houses and putting blue plaques on them. So we've got the Spotted Cow in Malton that is Victorian inside, but we're looking at the front bar, the little snub there, that once again was always a favourite place that we went into. So you could class it as being very utility, bench seating, basic stools and tables with a fire in there. It is nice because they've got a local brewery etched mirror over the fireplace, which is, I think it's, is it Rose's?
Yeah, it's Rose, isn't
mirror?
It?
Yeah. And the setup of the bar as well. It's not an island bar, but obviously it's got 2 serving counters, and then you've got three areas, 3 rooms. But I mean, when it was first built, there was more rooms, even though it's hard to believe they actually opened up. As you walk through to the back, that room there would have been 2 separate rooms as well. So I think in Malton, the Spotted Cow is the nearest we've still got to a Victorian interior, although sadly that closed at the moment.
Just what I think on again, I'm conscious that people will be listening to this all over the place. Obviously, the clues in the name, where we said last week that we're all from Malton originally. Malton's a small market town in North Yorkshire. It's about halfway between York and Scarborough, so many of you will probably have either passed through it or around it on the bypass. It's a great little town. It's reinvented itself as a little bit of a food centre now, and we have a great food festival. And we mentioned last week we've got a long heritage in brewing as well. So well worth if you're up that bit of the woods. So the Spotted Cow is in the marketplace, again a little bit out of the kind of main town centre, but a great thing about Malton is if you get there on the train or bus or car, everything's very walkable. So certainly worth looking out for that one. So go on then, what's your next one, Nick?
Well, that's really covering Malton. So then we'll move to York, which is probably Bruce's forte anyway. But I've got the Phoenix, the Wellington.
Yeah, Green's got the Brass Cow. Yeah, the Wellington's quite a utilitarian pub, but it certainly takes Victorian time, doesn't it? I suppose the thing about this is you have to think that the perfect pub's Victorian because he was born in the Edwardian era. Yeah. Now, of course, there's some stunning Edwardian era pubs, but to him they'd be just everyday
like brewdog bars.
Exactly. And now, of course, in York we've got the Blue Bell, which is probably one of the finest preserved Edwardian pubs in the country. People absolutely love it, but of course to Orwell that would just be the everyday common as much pub, wouldn't it? Really?
Yeah.
So kind of bizarre, really.
Yeah.
But it wasn't always the outside as well. I mean, the inside. They made efforts on the outside. I mean, your local, Bruce. That's a classic Victorian pub. Once again, it was Emacs as a Tetley's Heritage pub. It's now owned by was it owned by Otley Brewery?
Otley and Punch jointly, yeah.
Yeah. So
okay. Go on, then, Nick. Move us on.
Is the Fox. Well, once again, we've talked about Camera. Camera were nearly successful in saving an iconic pub in York. And anybody who follows Camera, they will know of this name. It's the John Bull.
Oh, yeah.
And the John Bull is the first real ale pub that I knew that I went in York. I mean, once again, you two guys have been going in there before I did. So you can probably tell us a bit more about the John Bull than I can even do. But
I mean, it was just absolutely stunning, wasn't it? It was like stepping back in time. It was so dark all the day, in the daylight. You couldn't read the newspaper, could it?
I'd said it's probably a mucky old hall, and I mean, my grandma said it's a mucky old hall. That I think it was that dark because you could see all the bloody muck and dust because it looked always like it needed clean. So again, quite a small bar, wasn't it? Quite a small bar in that main.
It was, yeah.
But good beer, and again, I think often it was a real mix of people. Quite a few students, all the guys and things. So
But just tragic, it was demolished to make way for a hard stand for a couple of Mazda cars.
That's right. Yeah, the guy next door, didn't he? Sold it. The car ownership wanted more car parking. Yeah.
In fact, I remember two stories. I remember the story that you remember Mike that used to go in Sotheby's, Bruce. Big Mike, loved his traction engines. He used to help out in there, and he said the most popular beer was at the end of the night when they emptied all the drunk pint pots into a bucket and then put it back into a barrel, and it was called the Landlord Special. And anybody who didn't know that, because obviously it was all wooden cast in those days, it was easy enough to reintroduce it in. And then I remember, in fact, one of the last times that me and you went in, we were sat near the bar, and then there was some sort of family reunion come in, and there was like 2 or 3 people came in, and they sat on a table and a bench, and then a couple more came in, and we kept moving for them so they could actually all sit together. And it ended up that we actually moved right the way around the pub. And it ended up that I ended up being pushed off the seating into the doorway because we'd literally moved from the bar all the way around the edge of the pub into where the doorway was. And at that point, I wasn't as willing to give up a seat anymore. But no, it was always one of those pubs as well that when we'd been anywhere else, trying to remember exactly where it was, because once again, it was a walk out of the city. It was sort of isolated on its own, really. There's no other pubs near it. In fact, it was outside the walls, wasn't it?
Yeah. There's some interesting articles on the internet, actually. If you just put John Bull Pub York in, there's the Evening Press articles there. Its 20th anniversary was demolished. And, I mean, they really evoked the spirit of it so well. I mean, like you said, it was just wholly needless and cruelly barbaric. There's no evidence that was ever there now. It's a great article, though, and I say, now we're off because the assets of community value wouldn't be allowed to happen.
That's right, yeah.
No, I said Camera tried to do that, and they were very, very close to getting it saved, but just didn't quite manage it.
That was very early days, wasn't it?
It was in the early days, wasn't it? Yeah. Right, so let's move on to Leeds. We had to talk about Leeds last week. Obviously, we mentioned White Locks. I mean, that is a classic example of a Victorian pub palace with its etched glass, its screening, its ceramic bars. Tiles on the floor as well. The Adelphi, which once again was just around the corner from, it looked upon as Tetley's Tap at one point. Quite like the Adelphi in the Philharmonic in Liverpool, in that it had its separate rooms, its dining rooms and things like that, and glass screens. So don't know if you guys have got any comments about that one.
No, I think it's an underrated pub. I mentioned last week. I love going there. Again, it's a bit of a walk out of the city centre, but I've always really enjoyed it. It's always pretty rammed. I mean, I know when the universities are quite away from there, but it always seems to be rammed with young student type people.
Yeah,
and I think I guess the beauty of that one is you've got those passages by the bar, and we always ended up. And again, that's got little kind of bar areas, hasn't it? Kind of little kiosk things on the bars. I always can remember
glass
reading on one of those. Yeah.
But if you're listening to this and really want a jaw-dropping, open-mouth experience of a pub in Leeds, you've got to go to the Garden Gate.
Yes, it is worth.
You really need to walk there. You'll get off the bus and think you're in the wrong place. And then when you see its surroundings, I mean, it's just a miracle it survived in those days when they were planning all those houses. It's a council estate.
Yeah, it's kind of left all its own, isn't it?
They didn't raise it, and the houses impinge all around it, and it just stands there like an island. And the thing is, it's absolutely astonishing inside.
That'd be a crack. That'd be great to have that as your local, wouldn't it? You know, that a couple of streets away would be ideal, wouldn't it? And the beer's pretty good. It's I think that there is that Leeds Brewery. I quite like Leeds Brewery. They've got some beers there.
It was those guys that actually saved it, because at the very end it was going to be closed and not so much knocked down but redeveloped, and it was Leeds Brewery. They almost put it as a lost leader. They said, look, we don't see that it's going to be a big success for us, but it's got to be saved, it's got to be preserved, which is, those are the sort of breweries you want to support. I mean, as far as I know, the two lads who went to university in Leeds and then had a passion for beer and made a business out of it, they've been very successful. But fair play to them. They didn't put money first. They said, look, this is a pub that needs saving, and even if we can only break even with it, that's what we'll endeavour to do, because it's such a unique pub, and fair play to them two guys.
Right, go on, then. Let's hurry on, because we're not doing Lord of the Rings trilogy. We've
okay. Well, once again, Leeds.
We're still on number 1, by the way, out of 10.
Any Sam Smith's pubs in Leeds, we'll go for that.
Go on, then, give us one more bit further afield, then.
All right, Sheffield.
Yeah.
Me and Bruce, it was our last outing actually, wasn't it, Bruce? Was it end of last year? Not last year, year before, in fact. So the Grapes.
The Grapes, I'm going to say that's fantastic. That's the Irish pub now, isn't it, the Grapes?
Yeah. The locals call it Flynn's, I think. Cracking, once again. Central corridor, ceramic tiled. I think that was, I can't remember, that was one of the Sheffield breweries, but it wasn't one of the better known ones. Where else have we got? White Lion on London Road, where I used to go as a student.
Sam Smith's pub's like a classic two-room boozer that should belong out in the stick somewhere, yet somehow it's right there next to Crucible Square, isn't it? That's fantastic.
And then Sheffield Tap, that's got to be Victorian because it's part of the railway, and that's got a fantastic interior, hasn't it, as well?
Pseudo Edwardian, but style on Victorian. Fat Cat is Victorian. Yeah. Which once again, you know, it was a magnet. I mean, I was in Sheffield, 91, 92. I was a student there, and I remember 2 Danish exchange students came over one year, and they were like Vikings. They were 6 foot odd. And I said, right, I'll take you for some real ale, and took them down there, Kelham Island. That time, it was still all warehouses. And the Fat Cat really was in the middle of nowhere. And they were a bit afraid. They were saying, Nick, is it safe down here? I said, yeah, it's safe. Anyway, we got there. And we went in the little upstairs room, and I had them drinking Thixton's Old Peculiar because they reckoned they were drinkers. Anyway, after a few pints of that, they realised that Yorkshire beer was quite strong compared to the Danish lager. But yeah, the Fat Cat was a classic. I mean, now Sheffield, all down there, you can have a day crawl around Kelham Island area, no problem at all. You know, it's a bit like shoe shops and banks on the high street. They sort of, you know, once one's got established, they then start to attract other ones, and even pubs that were run down have now been turned around, rejuvenated into real ale pubs. So, anybody heading to Sheffield, head down towards Kelham Island when you won't go far wrong.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that may be one of our first trips when we're kind of pre-lockdown, really keen. I think it's been a year since I think me and you went, Nick, a few years ago, and it's not bad because it's equidistance for us because I'm down in Staffordshire, but I've just been reading quite a lot about the cutlery works, and there's quite a good vibrant scene. It sounds like in Sheffield, lots of kind of street food places, quite a few new breweries, like you say, Kelham Island now, we're all around there. It's going to be a mecca. So I think that sounds. So I think what we're saying is Victorian. We mentioned last week we quite like a bit of culture and a bit of history. So I think we certainly want a couple of Victorian type, or as Bruce said, Edwardian. But I think we're quite eclectic. So I think as long as we kind of ticked a couple of those off, you know, we mentioned last week we're just as happy now going to a micro bar or a micro brewery or some, you know, and even sometimes we've even been at 1 or 2 very posh hotels because they've had a good bar in there, or we've heard there's a good beer on. So I think in terms of us, I think we'd agree a little bit with George Orwell, but I think Bruce was right. Probably we're equally as happy being an Edwardian playboy, or sometimes even older, some of those really old, especially again back in York, and almost bloody medieval pubs as well. Let's move on to number 2. Yeah. So number 2, games such as darts are only played in the public bar, so that in other bars you can walk about without the worry of flying darts. I know that we've never really been kind of big pub games played. No, we haven't. Mentioned last week about me and Bruce used to go to a pub in Wester where if you played pool, you'd get half-a-sided when you were 13, 14. But I don't know, really. I mean, I guess for many pubs, certainly in the villages and in some of the towns like we're from, the darts team, the pool team are quite important, and that they do take the pub over in the midweek when it's quiet, don't they?
That's right. The revenue they bring in are quite nice, invaluable. Like in our local pub, Sam Smith's Crystal Palace, their Domino's teams there on a Monday night. Without them, it'd be empty. Having said that, there's nothing worse than seeing what would have been a nice room in a pub with the pool table plonked in the middle of it, because it just dominates the room.
Yeah.
And, that's a real bugbear.
You see less of that now, don't you? I mean, I think certainly a lot of the kind of pubs you talk about, and it's interesting that places like Wetherspoons don't tend to do that, do they? I mean, they've got free machines, but they don't tend to have things like that as well. I mean, byline, I'm a bit of a sports historian, and you know, it's also interesting that obviously when a lot of the coaching inns, when they obviously stopped having to house horses and things and have fields, often that's where football teams and rugby teams, again, got linked to the pub because the landlord had lots of space. He had a field often where the horses would have gone for the coaches. He had stables that were great for changing rooms. So there's another really strong And certainly, you know, when I was younger, playing football and cricket locally, again, often the pub was the centre of that as well. You got, I've got changed in pubs. I played rugby league. I've actually got changed in pub cellars to go and play places like West Yorkshire. So there's all that as well. So I think we probably would steer towards a pub. We wouldn't want. I think we've had the odd game of pool when we've been out on a trip, but that's probably about as far as it's gone, really.
I can't think the last time I walked into a pub and saw a dartboard actually being used, because once again, if the pub's got a dartboard, it's occupying an area where they would prefer to have people drinking and eating.
Yeah.
Certainly during the day and even on an evening, unless it is darts evening, which tends to be Monday, Tuesday nights, because they're traditionally the nights that the pub is the quietest anyway.
Yeah.
I know the pool league round Malton, you know, when I played the pool league, it was always on a Monday night, because that was the quietest night, and that was the night that the landlords wanted people in drinking. That was, you know, they put free food on. So I say I can't think of any pub where I've walked in recently and I've had a game of arrows yet. I can remember when I was 18, 19, 20, it wouldn't be untoward to go to the bar and say, "Oh, you got the darts." So
I suppose the one that I was thinking about for us was probably more of a hindrance was dominoes, and obviously in quite a lot of work I say that's a massive sport. And if you go in that bloody lounge when the domino lads are there, or you sit at a table that is a domino table, you'd often get some little old bloke with his walking stick saying, "You've got to move now because that's our table." So I think that's probably more of a hindrance these days. Just forget about darts. It's the domino players. It was interesting watching that Tom Kerridge thing on the telly about pubs the other month about that pub in London, the West Indian pub, where again that was the problem with the domino players who would come in, buy half a pint, and then sit there for 4 hours. The poor landlady was so, you know, she really wanted to make the pub and make it go. But
the old Malton Royal Oak used to be definitely like that.
Yeah. Right, let's move on. So that's not. I think we'd agree with the second part. We don't want darts flying at us or whatever else. And I guess same with all those fruit machines blipping and blapping as well in the corner. So number 3, I'll put these two together really because I thought they're a little bit linked a really bit. The pub is quite enough to have a talk without the house possessing neither a radio or a piano. And linked to that, the barmaids know the customers by their name and take an interest in everyone. So again, I put a couple of our photos up there. So there's a very nice picture of me there in the Duke of York in Whitby, looking. Well, I'm actually looking at my phone. I should be looking out the window at that lovely view of the harbour.
Yeah,
with a very nice,
dead.
And a very nice pint of, I think, probably an Ilkley beer there. The Duke of York, I don't think that's got a jukebox or anything in it, has it? I can't think of one. I've never heard music in there. Maybe
in the background sometimes, yeah. Especially in that room, which I sort of call the lounge area. They have a speaker in that corner there, just above your head, and it can not pump out music, but sometimes it can be a little bit, And
in fact, for me, that was the last pub. That's the last pub I've been in, and that was back in October. That's the last pub I have physically set foot in since October. We went for half term, had a nice little week. Just in a little cottage down by the harbour, and that was our next door but one. And that's the last time I went to a pub, because obviously soon after that, in our neck of the woods, we went into lockdown and haven't come out. And then the picture below is just a picture of the little bar, the back bar, the side bar, I guess it is. I don't know what it is, in the New Malton, which again is the main bar in New Malton, which again is a. It was the Whip In, Bruce, wasn't it, when we were kids, and we used to go there for a frothy cappuccino, but was taken over by a young couple not so long ago, and they've made it into a really nice little gastro pub. But they always have a couple of, three. They normally have 3 beers on, don't they? They tend to do a trio of beers, often very Yorkshire. And it's nice in there because I think, obviously, Nick, you're a bit of a regular in there.
I class that as my local now. If I'm going out for a pint of beer, a pint of real ale, then I'd go in there, yeah.
And certainly Gemma, the landlady or the owner, she's very friendly and will always take an interest in what you've been doing. And so that's to me. Have you got any thoughts from your pair of you about?
Well, you raised a good point last week when you talked about the murmur in the pub, and that's a real good point. There is that comforting din, isn't there? Really, as those conversations going on, or moulded into one. It's a really comforting sound, isn't it? And it is a funny thing because, of course, we're talking about these rules of Orwell's now, and of course the pub owner who aspires that all his pubs should follow these rules is currently Humphrey Smith, and of course we're very familiar with his pubs, and of course mobile phones and devices are banned. And it's interesting, because I know before Christmas last year, before lockdown Christmas, myself and Nicky's girlfriend, 2 friends of mine, we were in the Wellington in York on I think probably the last Saturday before Christmas. It was really busy, And it was great because, you know, there were a lot of students there before they went home. And actually, it goes to show, you know, there was that murmur amongst all the small rooms. Pub was packed. Nobody, of course, because not allowed to, was looking at a phone.
Yeah.
And it was really great to see. Possibly people should, you know, more people should do that, really, because undoubtedly the phones and people, social media and TikTok, it's distracting the pub experience, really, isn't it? Yeah, I'm aware that some people are furious about going to Sam Smith's pubs and just really can't deal with it at all. And find ways to distribute.
I was trying to think. Equally, I think there's quite a lot of Sam Smith's pubs that have hardly any atmosphere in them. I mean, the one that I probably go to most around there is the Falcon in Chester, which is a great little pub, but you don't often get that kind of. At the moment, I was thinking, you know, that your pub, Bruce, you know, Fox across the road there, though it's a multi-room pub, isn't it? With what, three rooms? I guess, and I was thinking about that. Sometimes hit and miss, isn't it? You pick a room in a pub, and there's often one pub that's a bit more lively. One pub tends to be more of a locals pub. So one room might be a bit more of a couples kind of place where they tend to sit in couples. But that was one I thought about. The Fox as a nice pub. I think the Minster Inn in York as well. That's another pub that always seems to have a good. You know, I guess because the rooms are a bit smaller, so you can't hear other people's conversations really. Nick, anything from yourself? Or we move on?
Yeah, I mean, the radio, no piano. Not so much radio, but you know, I remember jukeboxes. And a jukebox could be a draw, could be an attraction if it had a classic range of classic tunes in there. I mean, I'm sure you two, if they'd been Lindisfarne in a jukebox anywhere, you would have been making a beeline for it. You don't seem to see jukeboxes anymore now.
No,
you know. And yet at one point they were supposedly a moneymaker. Well, that's to do with PRS and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. Piano. I don't think I'd mind going in a pub and be a piano there. As long as somebody could play it properly. I mean, certainly mention the Grapes in Sheffield. The only way I found that pub was because the Irish night. As a student, thought, you know, I went out, was mates with a lad who was Irish ancestry, and he said, you know, I know of a pub, but it's a bit off the beaten track because once again, it's not easy to find the Grapes. It's city centre, but you've got to know where it is to find it. And they had an absolutely cracking. I think that was a Monday or Tuesday night. You know, the main front room that used to, and I still think they still have the Irish night. So I would have never found that pub without the Irish night going on. And, you know, it attracted some cracking musicians like, so music-wise, live music, I don't mind. Bruce, what about the Market Tavern in Leeds? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, long gone, sadly. It was very popular with deaf people, wasn't it? And so the jukebox had to be...
definitely deaf with an iron lung, I think, to go in there.
We went in there one day, and it was two rooms, the bar dividing the two rooms, and we looked through, and the jukebox was as loud as anything, and it was full of old folks with like the shopping bags, and they were all smiling and laughing and enjoying the sound. We said to the barman, said, "How the hell can they stand that music so loud?" And so it's the local deaf club that they pick up on the vibrations, like so.
So the two I was thinking about this one was, Bruce, you remember this, the Golden Lion in Malton, which again is a pub marketplace there. And if you remember, there used to be that little room on the right as you went in, and for some reason they got a massive jukebox on the wall in there. And I can remember us going on there probably Saturday lunchtimes with Simo, our mate, who'd probably come on the bus from Westo the one day a week bus game, and him just playing that bloody "Are You Going to San Francisco" on repeat and repeat and repeat, because he was going through the hippie phase. And then the other one I remember, which again fondly remember really, back to Keighley, the Cricketers in Keighley. I always remember being sat in the bar there, and they had Radio 1, Radio 2, Dave Lee Travers, that snooker competition. Remember the snooker quiz? I can't what it was called now. It was a general knowledge quiz that somebody phoned in. And you played it like snooker, didn't you? So you picked a colour and you got 2 points, 3 points. I remember that being blaring. And I was just sat there mesmerised by Dave Lee Travis's Saturday quiz. That was there, man. Right, let's move on. So I think what we
just before you move, now the Golden Lion, you said you used to go there Saturday.
Yeah.
You used to go there Saturday morning because for some strange licensing reason, that used to open about 11:30. This is when the licensing.
Well, that's probably because the market was at the back, wasn't it?
And that opened at 11:30, and no other pub in town was either allowed to or ever did open before 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Can you remember that?
Yeah.
So once again, tiny little pub in it.
Spotted Cow had an even earlier license, didn't they? Spotted Cow.
They did from a Tuesday and Friday on market days.
8 o'clock or something in the morning, and the back bar in the the Farmer's Bar in, what pub I'm thinking about? What's it called now? It's called Rory's Pub.
That's right, yeah.
What was it used to be called? King's
King's
Head.
Head. King's Head, yeah.
The Farmer's Bar there and a license as well. The back there for the market guys. So I think
on a Friday in Malton though, the pubs always could open all day on a Friday, couldn't they? It was quite liberalised in Law's Malton, didn't it, compared to most places? Pubs, even since we were kids, didn't have to close on a Friday afternoon, did they?
Yeah, no.
And that was unique.
So I think we're summing up then. So we'd like a Victorian pub. We'd probably like a couple that are quiet as well. We probably wouldn't stay very long. We want it was too noisy. And I guess we don't stay in these pubs very long enough, but it's always nice when the bar staff, I think we should say now, take an interest in you and often ask you, what you're doing. And those that are interested in beer often are quite, we're great for giving are you thinking about going to this place or, which is always good as well. So move on. 5 and 6. 5. Okay. It sells tobacco, cigarettes, aspirins, and stamps, and is obliging about letting you use a telephone. Again, I think this is very much of the era, isn't it? And I was trying to think of pubs where we'd been and we'd bought other things. There used to be quite a few pubs in Stoke that used to sell Dutch tobacco behind the bar, but perhaps not mentioned many days ago. I've got a picture there. One of the pubs that I think at the moment it's shut. It's unfortunately some issue about being open and closed. There's a little pub called the Millbrook Inn down in Devon, deepest Devon in Southpool. It's a fantastic little village. Again, quite a long way from civilization. And there's no other shop or anything in the pub now. So they actually have a veg shed on the side there. And again, we've stopped them there a few times. It's actually been great. But I think I bought that cauliflower in the picture, that if anybody can see it. Which is great. It was a great idea, really, And I know a lot of pubs during lockdown have done that as well. They've opened up community shops and, been able to go and get to, obviously, they access to things like cash and carry and bring in sense. And that's really helped, certainly older people in some of those more remote villages. So
we've got one over in Fulford doing that now and doing a roaring trade.
I mean, you mentioned about some wet pubs not ever coming out of COVID, but I think certainly some of the village pubs, it's actually given a new lease of life. They have become even more of an asset than they were before.
Yeah.
And even down to, maybe getting some people getting in there, not so much going for a drink, but at least getting used to the staff and then thinking, right, they helped us out, I'll support them once they're back open as a pub sort of thing. So in certain respects, it might have done some of these little country pubs that were struggling a lot of good, really.
Yeah, although again, last summer we actually hired a pub down in Devon for daughter's 21st, and that was a whole pub, a fantastic pub, 13th century church house inn, quite famous pub. And the landlady there just given up, just said, I can't make any money, especially with lockdown. So I turned it into a self-catering. I mean, it was fantastic for us. Whether that'll continue, it's quite a bit of a shame, I guess, for some of the locals. There were quite a few people trying to get in while we were there. We thought the pub was still open because everything was still there.
I would say that was the easy way out, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, the landlords and the owners of these pubs that have really gone, they've been working 24/7. They really have become an asset to the community. I mean, the blacksmiths at Swinton, they did that very early doors, and they created a shop and they did everything there, and it's been successful, and that's good for them.
Okay, we talked about food a lot last week, and again, Orwell also mentions food. He talks about his number 6. There should be a snack counter where you can buy liver, sausage sandwiches, mussels, cheese, pickles, and large biscuits with caraway seeds. And then he says, and upstairs, 6 days a week, you can get a good lunch. For example, a cut of the joint, 2 veg, and a boiled jam roll. So I think we talked about Whitelocks in Leeds last week, which used to be a very famous Yorkshire pudding meal. And I think we covered quite a bit of food last week, and we were quite honest and open and said food was often quite a part of our trip, and where we could, we'd try out some of those local delicacies. We chatted last week about black peas and black puddings in Bury and various other bits and pieces. So I think we'd all agree.
Well, I'll just give you one. My student days back in Sheffield again, my local then was the Shakespeare. Run by Dave and Norma, cracking landlord and landlady, just off Healy. It was just off Richards Road. And I shared a house with a lass from Southampton. So we used to go down to the Shakespeare, and they used to have a quiz night. And the food, obviously, when there's quiz night on, often the pub will give food away. The food there was beef dripping bread fingers and lumps of black pudding. So for a lass from the south, she found that quite unique. She didn't have a clue what black pudding was until I said, well, I'll have a couple of pieces, see if you like it, wash it down with your Tetleys, and then I'll tell you what exactly is in it like. But no, that was proper South Yorkshire quiz food, was that? Yeah. Beef dripping, bread fingers, and black pudding. I mean, the beef dripping is great because obviously it's salty, so it actually made you drink more beer. It's like the old cinema trick where if showed a film about the desert, turned the heating up, and then people bought hot drinks and oh no, the other way around, bought ice creams because that's so hot, turning the heating up, and show a film about the Arctic and make it freezing, and people buy hot drinks. So I'm thinking about food. So that not a full meal, but as far as snacks were concerned, you can't get much better than bread dripping fingers and lumps of black pudding.
Yeah, I was thinking that we probably didn't always eat that substantial meal in pubs because obviously we want to have a few beers and move on, don't we? So I think you're right, probably snacking is part of it. I think sometimes you get the unexpected. So often, we've been in pubs where the landlord just bought out some bowls of chips and things and put them down for you. And there's a couple of pubs around us that do sausage rolls on a Friday afternoon, which is, really nice, really. And again, quite a few now are doing kind of these sharing boards, like pork pies and cheese platters. And I can see that being quite appealing. So I think in terms of the pub itself, we wouldn't probably necessarily go for the food. Again, having a snack is probably something that again we might consider, and I think often we would do that in between kind of pub to pub. I think that was our kind of philosophy. Grab something to eat as you're going from one pub to another, so that you maximize your drinking time. So we're on to number 8. I'll just put that one on. Yeah, this is the Nick. You sent this picture. This is the tap, isn't it, at Staveley, which is the Hawkshead Brewery tap, which is quite a modern building actually. Going back to we talked about Victorian, it's kind of an industrial unit, but it's really nice, isn't it? It's well laid out, and I was thinking that's some of the best food we've had, and they do that kind of snacking platter, which we've always really enjoyed there.
Call it English tapas, I suppose you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Proper sausages and stuff like that, and and a cracking range of beers on.
So it gets a bit kind of weird now. Well, not weird, I don't know. Number 8, a creamy sort of draft stout, and it goes better in a pewter pot. And I guess, again, as Bruce was saying, that's probably a sign of the times, isn't it, when he was drinking in the 1920s and 30s, really, when porter and stout were probably one of the most popular brews, especially in London. So that's where kind of the old idea of porter comes from, which I've learned on my beer course is all about the water. The water in London and the water in Dublin is very similar. It's very soft, and therefore it's very good for dark malts, and it creates that nice taste. Yeah, which is interesting.
That's why Fuller's London Pride is a darker beer.
Yeah, where Porter in London and obviously Dublin Stout. Although again, I think there's also something to do with governments again though, and taxes on barley and things, which again, why Guinness suddenly went towards black stout, and the same in London. And then number 9, they are particular about their drinking vessels at the Moon Underwater, and never, for example, make the mistake of serving a pint of beer in a handleless glass. Apart from glass and pewter mugs, they have some of those pleasant strawberry pink china ones. But in my opinion, beer tastes better out of a china, which again is interesting. I think we mentioned glasses last week, didn't we, a little bit, and about the jugs and the straight.
I will totally disagree with that. I hate those pint pots that you get in the craft brewery places. I just hate them.
Not with the handles.
I mean, like a jug.
Yeah.
You get the Conservative Club or the Golf Club. I don't know. I think some beers. I think Ruddles County or something like that sits quite well in one of those jugged. Imagine it.
Well, it's not a full pint either. It's not a full pint. I used to go once in another pub in Sheffield. We used to go in there, and because the beer wasn't great, sometimes you used to have Guinness. The lass behind the bar, she used to say, "All right," because my mate was he had a disability, so he preferred to have a glass with a handle on it. And she said, "Well, I'll give you it in a straight glass and tip it in there," because she says, "You'll see." She says, "Those pint pots," she says, "it's not a full pint. You don't get a full pint in there." So
I can't see how you could get away with that. They're all man with a pint, aren't they?
And it always looks smart, Nick. It must have been up to your illusion. It always looks smart,
it's the thickness of the glass, though, isn't it? I mean, the glass on those pint pots is very, very thick. But I always like a branded glass. That's why I've got my Nick Stafford's one tonight. That I'm drinking me nightmare with.
It always intrigues me at these beer festivals, all these bloody horns. You've seen these drinking horns that they sell. I've never actually seen anybody drinking out of one, but you can always, whatever pub beer festival you go to, there'll be some bloke with a bit like one of your Vikings, Nick, from Denmark, in the corner with his long hair and his leather waistcoat on, selling drinking horns.
We've got Valhalla in York, and you have to pay £20 deposit if you want the drink out with the horn. But of course, the beer goes warm as well. Well,
Well, I was thinking, I mean, I've had a couple of beers out of pewter every here and there, and I think mainly when you go to one of these medieval nights, and I go, no, I suppose it's got a certain taste. I think the beer needs to be flat, and of course, what they say is the reason why they put it in pewter was you couldn't see what space it was in. And it was only when we had glass that we started to put in things like finings because people realised how horrible and murky their beer looked. But hey, we've come full circle because you've got these New England IPAs. Guess what? You can't see through it. and we all sniff it and think, that must be off when it's supposed to be like that, shouldn't it? This aging look. So, yeah. So, I don't think glassware would probably determine us from visiting a particular hostelry or not, and working it through. Really, I think we had a good chat about branded glasses last week as well, and again, I think we've probably, I think certainly mine and Bruce's wives would say we've got far too many glasses. My missus always said there's not a glass in that beer boxes that's come through the door today. They do have several ones, and then the final thing he talks about is this: you go through a narrow passage leading out of the saloon and find yourself in a fairly large garden. Many are the virtues of moon underwater. I think that the garden is its best feature because it allows whole families to go there instead of mum having to stay at home and mind the baby while dad goes out alone, which I think is very forward thinking for Orwell in the 90s.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
but I think it's completely contradictory because the very nature of a Victorian pub, very, 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 very few Victorian pubs actually had beer gardens. Didn't exist. So I can't see how he's going to find a Victorian interior of a pub with a beer garden.
Yeah, and I was trying to think actually that I was trying to think of a pub that had a good beer garden.
Exactly.
I was struggling a little bit. Certainly, like you said, those older ones. I've got a picture of the Monk's Walk in Beverley because it's got a very nice passage, and that's got a series of rooms that go off that passage working through the back there. But no, I mean, I think the only one I could think of was the pub in Haworth. Is it the Golden Fleece? That's got. I remember us sat in that garden. I think probably because when we went drinking on our trips, certainly in the early days, it was in the middle of winter, so it's horrible.
But you see, these are the old coaching hinds. These are the pubs that go well before Victorian times, or these are your classic country pubs. And there's plenty of nice country pubs with beer gardens. Yeah. But I myself was trying to think, and I think my best view is the Water Edge Inn at just outside Ambleside. You have cracking rail ale, and you sat right there, and they've got the grassed area between where their pub is and the edge of the Lake Windermere. But nowhere is it near Victorian. Yeah, it's got real ale, but I can't think of a Victorian pub that sells decent beer.
I mean, the beer garden in the Lamb and Lion at York, of course, is quite stunning. That's fantastic.
Yeah, but that's not a Victorian pub. It's more medieval, isn't it, Bruce?
Hundreds of years, it closed, reopened, burnt down, demolished, various incarnations. That's quite stunning. I suppose the only thing is, though, of course, remember, in Orwell's time, there may be large beer gardens, and possibly, since then, the land's been redeveloped and the beer gardens effectively been sold. So he may have had a point, really, because most of the great Victorian inns are in urban conurbations. Cities aren't there, really.
Yeah,
so they may have had beer gardens, which have long since gone, sadly.
Yeah, the only one I could think of we mentioned last week was remember the Highlander bar we mentioned in Scarborough, up on the Esplanade there, and that used to have I wasn't really a beer garden, but it was a few tables out the front there, and obviously you look over South Bay, which is quite nice, and I guess that's probably hotels. I was thinking even we mentioned Whitby, even there's very few. I mean, there's the Wetherspoons you can sit outside there, but look, all those little cracking pubs, Whitby. Obviously, it's such a little old town. There's not a lot of space to kind of sit out and drink, is there?
No, the pub wasn't built with the garden in mind. This was it, because once again, going back to the whole purpose of your outside area, that was to accept your coaches and your horses. So you had a lot of your coaching inns. They had yards at the back, so I can think of plenty of pubs. Nellie's in Beverley has got a yard at the back that is now a car park, like it used to be.
Yeah. Well, they've got a bit of a garden on the other side there. Last time we were there,
you can't see it's a garden. It's an outdoor area. Yeah. That was really developed for the smokers.
And of course, the next thing now is, and certainly, in my town, in Newcastle, we've actually closed a couple of streets down to allow, and Liverpool's done the same. The council have allowed them to close roads so that the pubs can spill out and have outdoor seating, and that might be something else that we may become more regular, more popular, isn't it? Which I think is really great. Really, I quite enjoy that. So we've done the through 10. So I think I'm keeping score. We've probably agreed with about 60-70% of what Orwell's suggesting. And I guess obviously we're talking nearly 100 years on from there. So I don't think we probably use Orwell as our go-to guide. I think we agree with the probably ones at the start we agreed more with the ones towards the end there. So because we're just really thinking about next week. Next week we're going to start thinking about how you plan a beer trip, and I think we mentioned last week that I think we've all probably spent most of our heads in the Good Beer Guide, the Camera Good Beer Guide. So I think we probably use that rather than Orwell's 10s. But I think we've given that a good go, really, and we kind of put those together. I'm still saying the Bolt Makers, certainly, as I remember it, would be my Moon Under the Water pub at the moment. Bruce, what about yourself? Have you going to sum them all up, or where do you think?
Yeah, you're right. I think it has a special place for all of us, the boat makers. That Timothy Taylor's had such a great reputation, and to go there to fix the brewery tap, it had that little bar at the front.
Yeah, but I've already chosen it, so you've got to choose another one.
The branding is quite shocking.
You can't miss it now, can you? With that branding, crikey.
No.
Branding is shocking. I think it'd be joint tooth me. I think Nellie's at Beverley on a cold, dark winter's night is absolutely stunning. To go in there, these stone flag rickety floors, you've got the walls covered in tobacco going back years. You've just got gas lights. It's too dark to read. It's always full of people, but there's a fire in every room, and it's really just the light for the fire illuminate on a cold, dark winter's night. That's absolutely stunning, I think. So for me, Nellie's...
that's a good show, actually. And I think last time me and Nick in there, I went to the bar and bought 2 pints of mild, which cost them like £2.10. If I had to say, I did say for 2 pints. He goes, yeah, but you buy mild, which is like, I don't know what it was in those days, what are these days, but good value as well. So, Nick, what about yourself? Nellie's, we've ticked off Bolt Makers and Keighley.
Right. I don't know favourite, but I'll give you a couple that we've not mentioned. We're going further afield. If ever I go to London, I like to go in the Red Lion, which is a tiny little Fuller's pub. We were talking about small pubs last week and talking about the Bolt Makers being small, but this is tiny. But it's floor to ceiling, etched glass and mahogany. It's just off Mayfair, actually. The easiest way to find it is to head to Fortnum Masons, go in the back streets behind there. It's on the Duke of York Street, which I remember because of York being Yorkshire. And I say it's a tiny little Fuller's pub, but it's literally one little front room, one back room. But in terms of Victoria Arna, that is a cracking one. And then we all know it, go across the Irish Sea to Dublin, the Palace Bar, another example of a cracking Victorian Irish pub, right at the end of Temple Bar. So once you get all the idiots heading towards the traditional looking Irish pubs, they seem to miss the Palace Bar. They don't tend to see it. So, that classic 2-door entrances, but in fact, there's only one door gets you into the pub and the back room. And once again, it's one of those pubs where you actually start at the bar and work your way around moving seats. And then when you want the drink, you don't get up. You just basically pass the parcel, you get a glass back to the bar and then you get another one. So I'm sure you two will probably agree with me with that one. Now I mentioned it. It's further afield, but Palace Bar.
That's on Fleet Street, isn't it? Just as before you get into Temple Bar, which is probably like slightly out of the way. And I did mention last week, if you ever get a chance to watch the Irish pub film documentary, it features in there, which is a really good one. I remember my memory of that one, Bruce, was chatting to the barman when we were probably first ever went there, and you mentioned that races were on at the Curragh, and you mentioned obviously Dad was a racehorse head man at racehorse stables, and with that they'd organise you a lift. Some guy said, right, that's fine, we'll get you a lift there, we'll take you now, and off you went, and you left me and Nick spent the rest of the afternoon there, where some random bloke got you in a car, drove. It's a fair way to the Curragh. It's not like 10 minutes down the road. It's about probably 45 minutes out of Dublin.
And the bar manager even gave us 2 members tickets to get in.
Yeah, and then you came back a bit later on. We caught up with you, which is just barmy. It was really good.
I had his wife's members bar, and the bloke on the gate of the Curragh says, you're looking very well, Mrs. O'Connell. Yeah.
Cracking. Couldn't make it up. Good stuff. So I think we're about there then. So that's this episode nearly put to bed. So again, I hope those that have been listening, you've enjoyed that. We are gradually kind of getting this out a bit further afield. So we are now available on Apple Podcasts and on Google Podcasts. As I mentioned, we have got our own YouTube channel. So if you just look for Malt Travail, you should find us there. Next week, a bit of a homage to our 80s and 90s drinking. I've titled next week's Orchestral Manoeuvres in the GBG, Planning the Perfect Beer Trip. So for Get a Nola Gay, we're going to be looking for the plotting and planning our routes, our must-tick-off pubs, I think we always kind of had a couple of plan Bs as well, didn't we, in case things.
Yeah.
I know I put a tweet picture that it was snowing like hell here at the weekend, and I can remember getting up very early a couple of days and ringing. We probably didn't ring round in those days. We must have done it over the kind of landline and said, "Look, what's it looking like with you? What's it like in York, Bruce?" Oh, it's really heavy. And I remember getting somewhere and trains were being cancelled. I think one year every train was cancelled. We ended up getting on buses. I think we ended up in Bradford.
Bus to Bradford,
Buzz after buzz. Not even knowing how the hell we were going to get back home. But that's when you're young, you don't care. So, so if you tune in next week, guys, we'll carry on our discussion. So have a good week, everybody. And I'm going to stop recording now.
Bye.
Cheers.